I will never forget the way Madison's laughter echoed through the grand hall of my son's mansion that day. My hands were trembling, clutching the faded brass key my husband had left me. "It suits you, you wrinkled old witch. Better hurry before the termites eat your new home too." Those words still ring in my ears when I wake up at night. How did it come to this? How did my son Christopher, the boy I raised with every ounce of love I possessed, stand silently while his wife hurled those venomous words at me? It was the reading of Henry's will that changed everything. My husband of 43 years had been gone just 3 weeks when Mr. Peterson, our family lawyer, gathered us in the study of what had been our family home for decades. Christopher sat stiffly next to Madison, who wore a black dress that cost more than my entire wardrobe. Her red-soled shoes tapped impatiently against the hardwood floor as Mr. Peterson adjusted his glasses. "Let's proceed," he said, breaking the heavy silence. "To my son, Christopher Henry Brooks, I leave my penthouse apartment in Dallas, my investment portfolio, and the Brooks family business holdings." Madison's face lit up, her hand squeezing Christopher's arm so tightly I could see her knuckles whiten. My heart sank a little, but I wasn't surprised. Henry had always been practical about these things. Christopher had worked alongside his father in the business for 15 years. It made sense. "To my beloved wife, Eleanor," Mr. Peterson continued, his eyes meeting mine with what seemed like hesitation, "I leave the cabin property in the hill country, along with its surrounding acreage." The cabin, a weathered 2-bedroom structure that Henry and I had used maybe twice a year for weekend getaways when Christopher was young. It had been sitting empty for at least a decade, probably falling apart at the seams. "That's it?" Christopher's voice broke the silence. "Dad left Mom just the old cabin?" Mr. Peterson cleared his throat. "Yes, that's correct. The rest of the estate passes to you, as outlined." The room spun around me. 43 years of marriage. Decades of supporting Henry through the lean years when the business was struggling, of raising our son while Henry worked 16-hour days. All those nights I'd waited up, all the dinners kept warm, all the school events I'd attended alone because Henry was building his empire. And my reward was a dilapidated cabin in the hill country. Madison's laughter started as a small chuckle, then grew until it filled the room like poison gas. "Oh my God, Chris, your dad was brilliant. Can you imagine? Eleanor Brooks, queen of the termites." "Madison," Christopher said weakly, but there was no real admonishment in his tone. I sat there stunned as Mr. Peterson shifted, uncomfortably. "There is a letter as well," he said, handing me a sealed envelope with Henry's handwriting. "Your husband asked that you read this privately." I tucked it into my purse, too numb to open it then and there. The next few hours passed in a blur. I remember asking when I needed to move out of the family home, which now belonged to Christopher. "Actually," Madison interjected before Christopher could answer, "we've decided to sell this place. Too many outdated memories." She waved her hand dismissively at the home I'd lovingly maintained for decades. "You should probably be out by the end of the week." The end of the week. 4 days to pack up 43 years of my life. Christopher at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. "Mom, I'm sorry it's so rushed, but the buyers want to close quickly, and we've already purchased new furniture for the penthouse," Madison finished for him. "No offense, but your taste is a bit elderly." I looked at my son, searching for any trace of the boy I raised. The child who once cried when he accidentally stepped on a caterpillar, who made me Mother's Day cards with hand-cut paper hearts well into his teenage years. But his eyes slid away from mine, unable to hold my gaze. "I understand," I said quietly, though I didn't. Not really. 4 days later, I stood in the driveway with 4 suitcases at my feet, all that remained of my life with Henry. The movers had come and gone, hauling away furniture to storage since the cabin wouldn't hold much. Christopher had offered to pay for a small apartment in Dallas, but Madison had quickly dismissed the idea. "Don't be ridiculous, Chris. She has a house. Just because it's not to her liking doesn't mean we should waste money." So there I was, loading my suitcases into my aging sedan, when Madison appeared at the doorway of my former home. She leaned against the frame, arms crossed, watching me struggle with the heavy bags. "You know," she said, her voice dripping with false concern, "it really is for the best. You never did fit in with our circle. All those charity galas where you didn't know which fork to use." She laughed again, that same cutting laugh that had echoed in the study. "Now you can live authentically. No pretending to be something you're not." I closed the trunk of my car and turned to face her. "Madison, I hope you find happiness in your new home." Her smile faltered slightly, as if my lack of anger disappointed her. Then Christopher appeared behind her, his expression a mixture of guilt and impatience. "Mom, do you need help with anything else?" Before I could answer, Madison pulled him back inside. "She's fine, Chris. We have that call with the interior designer in 5 minutes." And that was it. No proper goodbye, no hug, no acknowledgement of all the years I'd given to this family. Just the slam of a door that was no longer mine to open. As I drove away, I caught one last glimpse of the house in my rearview mirror. The home where I'd celebrated Christmases and birthdays, nursed fevers and heartbreaks, planted gardens and memories. All of it now in Madison's manicured hands. I drove toward the hill country with tears. Blurring my vision, Henry's letter still unopened in my purse, and a terrible emptiness where my heart used to be. At 69 years old, I was starting over with nothing but a key to a forgotten cabin and the crushing weight of betrayal on my shoulders. Night had fallen by the time I reached the cabin. The gravel road leading to it was overgrown, branches scraping against my car like fingernails. When I finally pulled up to the small clearing, the headlights illuminated a scene far worse than I'd imagined. The cabin sagged like an old man too tired to stand straight. The porch listed to one side, and several window shutters hung at odd angles. Weeds had claimed the small front yard, and something, probably a family of raccoons, had made a home in what used to be a stone chimney. "Home, sweet home," I whispered, the words sticking in my throat. I sat in the car for several minutes, summoning the courage to go inside. The night air was thick with cicada songs and the distant howl of coyotes. Finally, I grabbed one suitcase and my purse, leaving the rest for morning. The brass key stuck in the lock, requiring a firm jiggle before the door creaked open. The smell hit me. First, dust and decay, with undertones of something musty. I felt along the wall for a light switch and was surprised when a single bulb flickered to life in what had once been our living room. At least the electricity was still connected. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust. The furniture we'd left, a sagging sofa, 2 wooden chairs, a scratched coffee table, looked like gray ghosts in the dim light. I made my way to the kitchen, where a few dishes still sat in the open cabinets. The faucet sputtered and coughed before producing a stream of rust-colored water. I sank down onto one of the kitchen chairs, which groaned beneath my weight. Henry's letter was still in my purse. With trembling fingers, I broke the seal and pulled out a single sheet of paper. "My dearest Eleanor, if you're reading this, then I've gone ahead on the final journey we always knew one of us would take first. I'm sorry for that. You're probably confused and hurt by my decisions regarding the estate. Please understand that everything I've done has been with careful thought. The cabin may seem like a cruel joke right now, but it holds more value than you realize. Look under the floorboards beneath the kitchen table. There's something waiting for you there. I love you, Ellie. I always have. From the moment you told me off for cutting in line at the Dairy Queen in 1978, you made me a better man than I ever would have been without you. All my love, Henry." I read the letter 3 times, my tears staining the paper. After all these years, he still remembered our first meeting at the Dairy Queen. In the midst of my grief and anger, this small detail pierced my heart. Setting the letter aside, I got down on my hands and knees, my joints protesting as I examined the floor beneath the kitchen table. One board seemed slightly higher than the others. I pressed on it, and it shifted. Using my car key, I pried up the board to reveal a small space underneath. Inside was a sealed manila envelope, along with a small wooden box. I pulled them both out and set them on the table. The envelope was heavy, filled with what felt like documents. The box was locked, with no key in sight. I opened the envelope first, pulling out a stack of papers. On top was another note from Henry. "Ellie, what I'm about to tell you must remain our secret for now. The land where the cabin sits contains one of the largest untapped natural gas deposits in the region. I've known this for 5 years but kept it quiet, buying up surrounding parcels through shell companies to protect our investment. The surveys, deeds, and mineral rights are all in this package, legally transferred to you. At current market rates, the value exceeds $50 million. Why didn't I tell you? Because I saw how Madison was influencing Christopher. I saw her greed, her disdain for you, for our beginnings. I feared what they might do if they knew while I was still alive. This is your security, your freedom. Use it wisely, Ellie. Not for revenge, but for the life you deserve. The key to the box is taped to the bottom of the kitchen sink. Trust no one until you've spoken with James Wilson at Wilson & Fisk in Austin. His number is on the business card enclosed. Always yours, Henry." I sat motionless. the papers trembling in my hands. $50 million? The cabin land was worth $50 million? It was too much to process. I shuffled through the other documents: geological surveys, property deeds, mineral rights contracts, all confirming what Henry had written. My husband, the practical businessman, had given me a fortune disguised as a burden. A sudden noise outside startled me. Headlights swept across the window as a vehicle pulled up beside my car. Panic gripped me. Had Christopher or Madison followed me? Did they somehow know? I quickly gathered the documents, stuffing them back into the envelope, and shoved it under the sofa cushion. The wooden box went back under the floorboard, which I hastily replaced. A knock on the door made me jump. "Mrs. Brooks? It's Sam Rodriguez from next door." Next door was a relative term out here. The nearest house was half a mile away. I vaguely remembered Henry mentioning a neighbor named Rodriguez, an older man who kept an eye on the cabin occasionally. I opened the door to find a weathered Hispanic man in his 70s, holding a covered dish and wearing a concerned expression. "I saw the lights and figured you might need some dinner," he said, extending the dish. "It's just some enchiladas my daughter made." The unexpected kindness nearly undid me. "Thank you, Mr. Rodriguez. Please come in." "Call me Sam," he said, stepping inside and looking around. "Place needs some work, doesn't it? I can help with that. Been keeping an eye on it best I could, but the last few years..." He shrugged. "Did you know my husband well?" I asked, taking the dish and setting it on the counter. Sam's eyes softened. "Henry was a good man. Talked about you all the time when he'd come out here. Always said you were the brains behind his success, though I don't think he ever told you that." Something in his tone made me pause. "Did Henry come here often?" Sam nodded. "Last few years, he'd be out here at least once a month. Said he was planning for the future." He glanced around the cabin, then back at me. Guess this is what he meant. I wondered how much Sam knew, whether Henry had confided in him about the gas deposits or the true value of the land. But Henry's letter had been clear. Trust no one yet. "Well," I said, forcing a smile, "it looks like I'll be staying here for a while. It's good to know I have a neighbor." Sam nodded, seeming to understand my need for space. "If you need anything, I'm just down the road. Good night, Mrs. Brooks." "Eleanor," I corrected him. "And thank you for the enchiladas." After he left, I sat alone in the kitchen, eating the still warm enchiladas straight from the dish. Outside, the Texas night buzzed and chirped with life. Inside, a plan was beginning to form in my mind. Madison's cruel laughter echoed in my memory. "It suits you, you wrinkled old witch." If only she knew what this old witch was sitting on. I thought about Christopher's silence, his unwillingness to stand up for me. I thought about the 43 years I'd given to a family that had discarded me like worn-out furniture. The old Eleanor, the dutiful wife and mother, might have called Christopher immediately, sharing the good news, offering to split the windfall. But that Eleanor had been left on the driveway of a house that no longer belonged to her. This Eleanor, the one sitting in a dusty cabin worth millions, had different plans. Morning arrived with harsh sunlight streaming through the dusty windows. I had spent the night on the sagging sofa, too exhausted to clear the cobwebs from the bedroom. My body ached in places I didn't know could ache, but my mind was surprisingly clear. I knew what I needed to do. After a makeshift breakfast of coffee made in an ancient percolator I'd found under the sink, I retrieved the business card from Henry's envelope. James Wilson, Wilson & Fisk Attorneys, with an Austin address and phone number. I used my cell phone. Thankfully, there was at least one bar of service at the cabin, and made an appointment for that afternoon. Before leaving, I remembered the wooden box. I taped my hand along the bottom of the kitchen sink until I found a small key secured with yellowing tape. The box opened easily, revealing several flash drives, a small notebook filled with Henry's cramped handwriting and photos, dozens of them of Madison and Christopher at various locations, entering hotels that weren't the Penthouse, meeting with people I didn't recognize, Madison shopping with price tags visible on the bags that would make most people gasp. My heart sank. Henry hadn't just been protecting the gas rights. He'd been documenting our son's life with Madison. I wasn't sure I wanted to. Know why? I packed everything carefully into my purse and drove to Austin, my mind racing. The law office of Wilson & Fisk occupied the top floor of a sleek building downtown. As I entered the plush reception area, I felt acutely aware of my wrinkled clothes and worn handbag. "Mrs. Brooks," a voice called. A tall man with silver hair and kind eyes approached, hand extended. "I'm James Wilson. Henry told me to expect you." "He did?" I asked, surprised. James smiled sadly. Your husband was a remarkable man, Mrs. Brooks. Very forward-thinking. Please come into my office. I followed him down a hallway lined with law books and expensive artwork. His office was spacious, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Austin skyline. He gestured for me to sit in a leather chair across from his imposing desk. Henry came to see me about 6 months ago, James began, settling into his chair. He suspected his cancer had returned, though he hadn't told you yet. The words hit me like a physical blow. Cancer? Henry died of a heart attack. James's eyebrows rose slightly. I see. Perhaps he never received confirmation of his suspicions. He cleared his throat. Regardless, Henry was concerned about the future. Specifically, your future. He left me a cabin, I said, the bitterness seeping into my voice despite my best efforts. He left you considerably more than that, Mrs. Brooks. James leaned forward. Did you bring the documents? I placed Henry's envelope on the desk. James spent several minutes examining each paper, occasionally nodding. Everything appears to be in order, he said finally. Henry set up a trust in your name. The cabin and surrounding properties, along with all mineral rights, are held within that trust. You are the sole beneficiary and trustee. What does that mean exactly? I asked. It means you control everything, Mrs. Brooks. The land, the rights to what's beneath it, the decisions about its development. He smiled. It also means that the value, conservatively $50 million, as Henry noted, is protected from anyone who might try to claim a piece of it. Like my son, I said quietly. James's expression remained neutral, professional. Henry expressed concerns about Christopher's judgment, particularly regarding financial matters. He was especially concerned about your daughter-in-law's influence. I thought about the photos in the wooden box. Did Henry share any evidence with you about Christopher and Madison? James hesitated. He provided certain documents suggesting that your daughter-in-law has been systematically influencing Christopher to make financial decisions that benefit her family's business interests, often at the expense of the Brooks family holdings. My stomach clenched. Madison's family owns MTC Development. James nodded, which has been steadily acquiring properties from Brooks Investments at below-market rates for the past 3 years. Henry tracked approximately $15 million in undervalued transactions. The room seemed to spin around me. Christopher he couldn't be that blind. Love can be blinding, Mrs. Brooks. As can fear of losing that love. James's voice was gentle. Henry wanted to protect you from the fallout. He knew that eventually, Christopher would burn through his inheritance. The penthouse, the investment portfolio, they're substantial, but not if mismanaged. And Henry expected them to be mismanaged, I finished. He wanted to ensure you had security, independence, the means to live your life without having to depend on a son who might not be capable of supporting you. James slid a folder across the desk. These are the trust documents. As of now, you can access a monthly stipend of $20,000 for living expenses, while the trust maintains the principal and any income from future development. $20,000 a month. The amount made my head swim. It was more than Henry and I had lived on for most of our married life. What do I do now? I asked, feeling suddenly overwhelmed. That's entirely up to you, Mrs. Brooks. You could develop the gas deposits immediately, which would yield the highest short-term return. Or you could wait, let the value appreciate. The choice is yours. I thought about the cabin, about Sam Rodriguez's kindness, about the cruel dismissal from Christopher and Madison. A plan began to form. If I wanted to make some improvements to the cabin, make it more livable. The trust allows for that, certainly. I can recommend several contractors. James smiled. Henry mentioned you always wanted a proper garden. The fact that Henry had remembered such a small detail, a wish I'd expressed years ago but had set aside for the sake of his business and Christopher's education, made my throat tight with emotion. Thank you, Mr. Wilson. James, please. He stood extending his hand again. Henry was more than a client. I considered him a friend. I hope you'll feel free to call on me whenever you need assistance. As I drove back to the cabin that afternoon, my mind was clearer than it had been in days. Henry hadn't abandoned me. He'd armed me. He'd given me not just financial security, but the freedom to choose my own path forward. By the time I reached the gravel road leading to the cabin, I'd made my decision. I wouldn't tell Christopher about the gas rights. Not yet. First, I would see what kind of son he truly was. Whether there was anything left of the boy I'd raised, or if Madison had hollowed him out completely. The first test would come soon enough. I pulled out my phone and dialed Christopher's number. Mom? Christopher answered on the fourth ring, his voice tinged with surprise. Is everything okay? Hello, Christopher, I said, keeping my tone neutral. I was wondering if you might come visit me at the cabin this weekend. I could use some help with a few things. A pause. I could almost hear Madison's voice in the background, though I couldn't make out the words. This weekend isn't great, he said finally. We're having the penthouse repainted, and I need to be here to supervise. I see. And next weekend? Another pause, longer this time. Look, Mom, I know you're upset about the will, but I'm not calling about the will, Christopher. I'm calling because I'd like to see my son. I kept my voice steady, though my hand gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. It's just not a good time right now. Maybe in a few weeks when things settle down. Things would never settle down. There would always be an excuse, a reason why he couldn't make the drive to see his mother in her termite-infested shack. All right, I said, swallowing my disappointment. In a few weeks, then. Great. I'll have my assistant put it on my calendar. Corporate Christopher, scheduling his mother like a business meeting. One more thing, I said before he could hang up. I was wondering if I might have the blue quilt from my bedroom, the one my mother made. Oh, I think Madison had the movers donate most of that old stuff. Old stuff. My mother's handmade quilt, the one she'd spent months creating when Christopher was born. The one that had covered him during childhood illnesses and teenage heartbreaks. I see, I said again, the words like stones in my mouth. Thanks for letting me know. Mom, I hung up before he could finish. Test 1 complete. The results were exactly as I'd feared. That evening, I sat on the sagging porch of the cabin, watching the sunset paint the Texas sky in shades of orange and gold. The property stretched out before me, hundreds of acres of scrubby beauty hiding millions in natural resources beneath. It was mine, yet I felt no joy in the possession. A truck pulled up the drive, Sam Rodriguez carrying a toolbox and a determined expression. Evening, Eleanor, he called, climbing out of the truck. Thought you might need some help with that porch before it collapses under you. You don't have to do that, Sam, I protested. But he was already examining the rotting boards. Henry would have wanted me to look after you, he said simply. Besides, what else am I going to do with my evenings? Watch more television? For the next 2 hours, I held boards while Sam hammered and replaced the worst of the porch's damage. We worked mostly in comfortable silence, broken occasionally by Sam's instructions or reminiscences about Henry. Your husband had big plans for this place, Sam said as we took a break, drinking lemonade I'd made from a mix found in the pantry. Said one day it would be worth more than all of Dallas. I studied Sam's weathered face. Did he tell you why? Sam shrugged. Didn't have to. My family's been in this part of Texas for 4 generations. We know what's under the ground here. That's why I never sold, even when the developers came knocking with their checkbooks. You know about the gas deposits, I said. Not a question. Yes, ma'am. And I know Henry was buying up land all around here through those shell companies of his. Sam's eyes twinkled. Not much happens in these parts that I don't notice. Why didn't you sell? I asked, genuinely curious. Sam looked out over the land, his expression thoughtful. Same reason Henry wanted to protect it, I expect. Some things are worth more than money. This land has been in my family since before Texas was Texas. My granddaddy's buried on the ridge yonder. My daddy, too. I nodded, understanding. Henry loved this place more than I realized. He loved you more, Sam said simply. Said you were the best thing that ever happened to him. Better than all his business success put together. The words warmed something inside me that had been cold since the reading of the will. Thank you for telling me that, Sam. As Sam packed up his tools to leave, I made a decision. Would you be willing to help me fix up the cabin? Make it properly livable? I can pay you, of course. Sam considered. This. Don't need paying. But I could use some help myself now and then. My arthritis makes it hard to keep up with my own place sometimes. Partners, then, I suggested, extending my hand. Sam's grip was firm and calloused. Partners it is, Eleanor Brooks. That night, I slept in the bedroom for the first time, after spending hours cleaning and changing the musty sheets. I dreamed of Henry, not the successful businessman he'd become, but the young man who'd cut in line at the Dairy Queen in 1978, whose smile had made my heart skip a beat. I miss you, I told him in the dream. I don't know if I can do this without you. Dream Henry's eyes crinkled at the corners, the way they always did when he was truly happy. You're the strongest person I've ever known, Ellie. You'll do just fine. Woke with tears on my cheeks but a newfound resolve in my heart. I would rebuild the cabin, make it a home. I would discover the truth about Christopher and Madison, and I would honor Henry's final gift by becoming the woman he had always seen in me, strong, independent, and capable of forging my own path. The Texas dawn broke over the hills, painting the sky with promise. I rose early, made coffee, and sat on the newly repaired porch, planning my next move. The first step would be to understand exactly what Christopher and Madison had been doing with the Brooks family business. For that, I needed someone with insider knowledge, someone who might have noticed the same troubling patterns Henry had documented. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I was looking for: Patricia Winters, Henry's longtime executive assistant. If anyone knew where the bodies were buried in Brooks Investments, it would be Patricia. Patricia Winters had worked with Henry for over 20 years. She'd watched Christopher grow from a college graduate to a company executive, and she'd been there when Madison first entered the picture. If anyone could give me insight into what had been happening at Brooks Investments, it would be Patricia. We arranged to meet at a small cafe in Austin, far from the corporate headquarters where she still worked. When I arrived, Patricia was already seated at a corner table, a manila folder beside her coffee cup. She stood to hug me, her embrace warm and genuine. "Eleanor, it's so good to see you," she said, her eyes scanning my face with concern. "How are you holding up?" "I'm managing," I replied, settling into the chair across from her. "The cabin is a work in progress." Patricia's mouth tightened. "That whole situation is disgraceful. The way they pushed you out so quickly." She shook her head. "Henry would be furious." "You knew Henry well," I said, stirring sugar into my coffee. "Did he ever mention why he left the estate the way he did?" Patricia glanced around the cafe, then leaned forward. "Henry was worried. The last year or so, he kept saying he needed to secure your future. At first, I thought it was just because of his health concerns." "His health?" I echoed, remembering what James Wilson had said about Henry suspecting his cancer had returned. "He never told you?" Patricia looked surprised. "He was having tests done. Nothing conclusive, but enough to concern him." My heart ached at the thought of Henry carrying that burden alone. What else was he worried about? Patricia pushed the folder toward me. "This. I probably shouldn't be sharing company documents, but..." She shrugged. "I owe Henry more than I owe Brooks Investments, especially now." I opened the folder to find spreadsheets, contracts, and email printouts. Patricia walked me through them, pointing out discrepancies and suspicious patterns. "See this property sale? Brooks Investments sold it to MTC Development, Madison's family company, for $4.2 million. 3 weeks later, MTC flipped it for $7.8 million. She turned the page. "And this one, and this one. Each time, Brooks takes a significant loss while MTC makes millions." "And Christopher approved these deals?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Patricia nodded grimly. "Every single one. Henry tried to block them when he could, but once he got sick, Christopher had more control. After Henry died..." She trailed off, her expression somber. "It's gotten worse," I finished for her. "Much worse. They're dismantling everything Henry built, piece by piece." Patricia's voice cracked slightly. 2 days ago, Christopher announced that Brooks Investments is being restructured. Half the executive team has been let go, replaced by Madison's father's associates. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Not only had Christopher allowed himself to be manipulated into undervaluing family assets, but he was now actively helping Madison's family take control of the company Henry had spent his life building. "Why?" I asked, more to myself than to Patricia. "Why would he do this?" "I've asked myself that question every day," Patricia sighed. "At first, I thought it was just love making him blind. But lately..." She hesitated. "Lately?" I prompted. "There have been rumors about Christopher's personal behavior, expenses that don't add up, late nights that aren't spent at client meetings." Patricia looked uncomfortable. "I don't like to spread gossip, Eleanor, but there might be things Madison could hold over him." The wooden box with its photos flashed through my mind. Things that could damage him if they came to light? Patricia nodded slowly. Henry suspected something similar. That's why he started gathering information last year. I thought. About my son. The boy who'd once had such clear eyes, such honest intentions. Had he truly fallen so far? Or was he trapped in a web of his own making, too ashamed or too frightened to break free? "Patricia," I said carefully, "if I needed to get a message to Christopher, a private message without Madison knowing, could you help?" She didn't hesitate. Of course. Whatever you need. We spent another hour going through the documents. By the time we parted, I had a much clearer picture of exactly how Christopher and Madison had been systematically undervaluing Brooks Investments' assets for the benefit of her family's company. It was corporate theft, plain and simple, disguised as strategic partnerships and synergistic relationships. As I drove back to the cabin, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and resolve. The son I'd raised seemed lost to me, replaced by a man I hardly recognized. But perhaps, just perhaps, there was still a chance to reach him, to help him see the truth before it was too late. Sam was waiting when I returned, his truck loaded with lumber and supplies. "Thought we might tackle the bathroom today," he called as I pulled up. "Unless you enjoy that leaky shower." I smiled, grateful for his steady presence. The bathroom sounds perfect. For the next few weeks, Sam and I fell into a comfortable routine. Mornings were spent working on the cabin, replacing rotted boards, fixing plumbing, cleaning decades of grime from windows and floors. Afternoons, I would drive into Austin to meet with James Wilson, going through Henry's files and learning more about the trust he'd established for me. The cabin slowly transformed from a dilapidated structure into something approaching a home. The porch was solid now, with a swing that Sam had built using wood from an old oak that had fallen on his property. The kitchen gleamed with fresh paint and the vintage appliances I'd found at a salvage yard, deliberately choosing pieces that reminded me of my grandmother's kitchen. I planted a small garden, the seeds taking root in the rich hill country soil. Tomatoes, peppers, herbs, simple things that connected me to the earth and gave me purpose each morning. In the evenings, I would sit on the porch swing, watching the sunset and thinking about Henry, not with the raw grief that had initially consumed me, but with a gentler sadness tinged with gratitude. He had known this would happen. He had prepared a soft landing for me in the midst of betrayal. It was on one such evening, about a month after I'd moved into the cabin, that a sleek black SUV came rolling up the gravel drive. The sun was just dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. I set aside my glass of iced tea and stood, shading my eyes against the glare. The vehicle stopped, and Christopher emerged from the driver's side. My heart lurched at the sight of him. My son, my only child, now a stranger in expensive clothes who couldn't meet my eyes. He approached the porch slowly, taking in the improvements to the cabin with evident surprise. "Mom?" he said, his voice oddly formal. "You fixed the place up." "With help," I replied, not inviting him onto the porch. Yet. "What brings you all the way out here, Christopher? I thought your calendar was full for the foreseeable future." He had the grace to look ashamed. "I got your message, through Patricia." The message had been simple. "I know about the property sales. We need to talk. Alone." "Madison doesn't know you're here?" I asked. Christopher shook his head. "I told her I had a meeting in San Antonio." He glanced back at the SUV nervously, as though expecting Madison to materialize from thin air. "You'd better come in then," I said, turning toward the door. Christopher followed me inside, his eyes widening as he took in the transformed interior. "Mom, it looks great." "Thank you," I said, gesturing for him to sit at the kitchen table, the very table under which Henry had hidden the truth of our fortune. "Would you like some iced tea?" "Sure," he said, looking distinctly uncomfortable as I poured him a glass. "Your message said you wanted to talk about property sales?" I sat across from him, studying the face I'd once known better than my own. There were new lines around his eyes, a tightness to his mouth that spoke of stress. "I know what's happening at Brooks Investments, Christopher," I said quietly. "I know about the deals with MTC Development. I know about the restructuring, the firing of Henry's executive team." Christopher's face paled. "Mom, it's just business. The company needed—" "Don't," I interrupted, my voice sharper than I'd intended. "Don't lie to me. Not here. Not in this place." The silence between us stretched taut as a wire. Christopher stared down at his untouched glass of tea, his shoulders hunched like a scolded child. "How long has Madison's family been using you to strip assets from Brooks Investments?" I asked finally. Christopher flinched. "It's not like that. The deals make financial sense if you look at the long-term strategy." "The strategy of transferring millions from your father's company to your wife's family?" I kept my voice, even though inside I was screaming. "Tell me, what would Henry think of this long-term strategy?" "Dad didn't understand modern business," Christopher said, a defensive edge creeping into his tone. "He was stuck in the past, afraid to take risks." I almost laughed at the absurdity. Henry Brooks, who had built a business empire from nothing, who had outmaneuvered competitors twice his size, being lectured about modern business by the son who was dismantling his legacy. Your father understood more than you give him credit for, I said. He knew exactly what was happening. Why do you think he structured his will the way he did? Christopher's head snapped up. What do you mean? I chose my words carefully. Henry was protecting what mattered to him, just as I'm trying to do now. By threatening me? Christopher's voice rose. By going behind Madison's back with cryptic messages? Is that what you think this is? A threat? I shook my head sadly. I'm trying to save you, Christopher. Before you lose everything. Lose what? I have the penthouse, the company. You have a penthouse that will be worthless if you continue down this path. You're trading your birthright for, whatever Madison is offering you. I leaned forward. What is she offering you, Christopher? What could possibly be worth betraying everything your father built? His face flushed red, then drained of color. You don't understand. It's complicated. Then help me understand. I softened my tone. I'm your mother. I've loved you since before you drew your first breath. Whatever it is, we can face it together. For a moment, I saw a flicker of my real son, the vulnerable, honest boy who had once trusted me with his fears and dreams. Then the corporate mask slipped back into place. There's nothing to face. The business decisions are sound. As for Madison, he swallowed hard. I love her. She loves me. That's all that matters. I thought about the photos in Henry's box, the evidence he had gathered. Did Christopher truly believe Madison loved him? Or was he merely trying to convince himself? Love should lift you up, not tear you down, I said gently. It shouldn't ask you to compromise who you are or betray your family's legacy. Christopher stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. I didn't come here for a lecture on love from someone who was married to a workaholic. For 40 years. The barb stung, but I refused to let it show. Your father worked hard to build something meaningful, something he hoped to pass on to you. Is this how you honor his memory? By selling it off piece by piece to your in-laws? I'm building something too. Christopher's voice cracked with emotion. Something bigger than Dad ever dreamed of. The merger with MTC will create a real estate powerhouse. Merger? This was news to me. You're merging Brooks Investments with MTC? Christopher looked away, realizing he'd said too much. It's still in the planning stages. And where does this leave Brooks Investments? The company name? Henry's legacy? His silence told me everything I needed to know. The Brooks name would be erased, swallowed by the larger MTC entity. All trace of Henry's life work would vanish, as if he had never existed. Christopher, I said, my heart breaking anew, what's happened to you? He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so like Henry's that it made my chest ache. Nothing's happened to me. I'm just doing what's necessary. Necessary for whom? For Madison? For her family? I stood, moving around the table to face him directly. What's necessary for you? For your soul? Christopher backed away as if my words were physical blows. I have to go. Madison will be wondering where I am. Of course she will. I didn't try to hide the bitterness in my voice. Heaven forbid you spend an hour with your mother without your wife's permission. That's not fair, he protested, but weakly. No, it's not fair, I agreed. None of this is fair. Not what you've done to your father's company. Not what you've allowed Madison to do to this family. And certainly not what you both did to me. Christopher reached the door, his hand on the knob. Mom, He stopped, seemingly at a loss for words. You what, Christopher? You're sorry? You wish things were different? I crossed my arms. Words mean nothing without action to back them. What do you want from me? He asked, his voice small. I want my son back, I said simply. The boy who knew right from wrong. The young man who was proud to carry his father's name. Christopher's shoulders sagged. For a moment, I thought I'd reached him, that some part of the real Christopher was fighting to break free. Then his phone buzzed, and I saw Madison's name flash on the screen. Just like that, the moment was gone. Christopher straightened, his expression closing off. I have to take this, he said, stepping onto the porch. Madison, hey. Yes, the meeting just wrapped up. I watched through the window as he paced back and forth, his voice too low for me to hear the words, but his body language telling the story. The tension in his shoulders, the way he kept glancing back. At the cabin, Madison was questioning him, and he was lying to appease her. When he returned, his face was set in determined lines. I need to get back to Dallas. Of course you do, I murmured. Mom, about what we discussed. I hope you won't do anything impulsive. Impulsive? I repeated. Like selling off 40 years of your father's work to your in-laws? Or like kicking your mother out of her home with 4 days' notice? Christopher had the decency to wince. That wasn't my decision. Madison just thought, Madison thinks a lot of things, doesn't she? And you just go along with all of them. I didn't try to mask my disappointment. Your father would be heartbroken to see what you've become. Dad left me the company, Christopher said defiantly. He must have trusted my judgment. I thought about Henry's letter, about his careful planning. Your father loved you enough to give you a chance to prove yourself, but he was wise enough to put safeguards in place in case you failed that test. Christopher's eyes narrowed. What safeguards? What are you talking about? I moved to the door and opened it. Go back to Madison, Christopher. Tell her whatever you need to tell her to. Keep the peace. But remember this conversation because the day is coming when you'll have to choose between the woman who sees you as a tool for her family's ambition and the mother who has loved you unconditionally since the day you were born. Christopher hesitated, seeming torn between anger and confusion. Finally, he stepped past me onto the porch. I'll call you, he said, not meeting my eyes. No, you won't, I replied softly. But when you're ready to talk, really talk, you know where to find me. I watched him drive away, the SUV kicking up dust on the gravel road. Only when it disappeared from view did I allow the tears to fall. I had hoped for, what? A miraculous change of heart? A sudden recognition of the truth? I had underestimated Madison's hold on my son. That night, I opened the wooden box again and examined the photos Henry had collected. There were dozens of them. Madison meeting with her father at exclusive restaurants, Christopher emerging from hotels looking disheveled, Madison shopping with other men, her hand tucked possessively into their arms. One envelope contained financial records, credit card statements showing charges at jewelry stores and luxury, hotels that couldn't be explained by business expenses. Another held printouts of text messages between Madison and her father, discussing Christopher in cold, calculating terms. He'll sign whatever I put in front of him, and Brooks won't know what hit them until it's too late. Henry had built a case, meticulously documenting Madison's manipulation and infidelity, but he'd never confronted Christopher with it. Perhaps he'd been waiting for the right moment, or perhaps he'd hoped Christopher would see the truth on his own. Now that burden fell to me. The question was, how could I open Christopher's eyes without pushing him further away? How could I save my son from the pit he was digging for himself? I fell asleep on the sofa, the document spread around me, my mind churning with possible approaches. In my dreams, Henry sat beside me, his hand covering mine. Patience, Ellie, Dream Henry counseled. The truth will find its way to the surface. It always does. When I woke, the first light of dawn was filtering through the windows. I gathered the scattered papers, returning them to the wooden box. Henry was right, both the real Henry who had prepared so carefully for this eventuality, and the dream Henry who had reminded me of the power of patience. I couldn't force Christopher to see the truth, but I could prepare for the moment when he would finally be ready to see it. And in the meantime, I could continue building my own strength, my own resilience. Starting today. 6 months passed. The cabin was unrecognizable from the dilapidated structure I'd first arrived. Sam and I had worked tirelessly, transforming it into a comfortable, even charming home. The porch now wrapped around 3 sides, offering views of the hills that took my breath away, especially at sunset. Inside, the rooms were bright and airy, filled with carefully chosen furniture that reminded me of my grandmother's home. Simple, sturdy pieces that would last generations. My garden had flourished beyond expectations. The tomato plants climbed their stakes, heavy with fruit. Herbs scented the air whenever the breeze blew. I'd even planted wildflowers that attracted hummingbirds and butterflies, turning what had been a dusty yard into a riot of color. More importantly, I had flourished. The woman who had arrived at the cabin, broken, humiliated, cast aside, was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, someone who had discovered her own worth beyond being a wife or mother. I hadn't heard from Christopher since our confrontation. Patricia kept me informed about the situation at Brooks Investments, and it wasn't good. The merger with MTC Development was proceeding at breakneck speed, with Christopher signing away more control each week. The company Henry had built was being hollowed out, its valuable assets transferred to MTC while its debts remained under the Brooks name. It's corporate vampirism, James Wilson explained during one of our regular meetings in Austin. They're draining all the value before discarding the empty shell. And Christopher can't see what's happening? I asked, though I already knew the answer. James shook his head. From what your contacts tell us, he's being kept distracted with personal indulgences. Expensive cars, exotic trips, that sort of thing. I thought of the photos in Henry's box. And Madison? She's been named executive vice president of the new merged entity, James said grimly. Her father is CEO. Christopher has a fancy title, but no real authority. The news saddened but didn't surprise me. My son had sold his birthright for a bowl of porridge, just as Henry had feared. Meanwhile, I had been putting Henry's gift to good use. With James's guidance, I had established the Eleanor Brooks Foundation, using a small portion of the trust's assets to fund programs for women over 60 who had been displaced from their homes or left financially vulnerable after long marriages. We purchased a small property in Austin, a graceful Victorian that had seen better days, and renovated it to serve as both the foundation's headquarters and a temporary residence for women in transition. I spent 3 days a week there, meeting with the women, listening to their stories, and helping them plan their next chapters. It was healing work, not just for them, but for me. Each woman who found her footing, who reclaimed her dignity and independence, felt like a personal victory. The other significant development came from an unexpected quarter. Sam Rodriguez, my neighbor and friend, had connections with environmental conservation groups across Texas. Through him, I learned about sustainable approaches to natural gas extraction that minimized ecological impact. Most companies go in like bulldozers. Sam explained one evening as we sat on my porch, watching fireflies rise from the grass. They take what they want and leave the land ruined. But it doesn't have to be that way. With Sam's guidance and James's legal expertise, I began exploring partnerships with companies known for their environmental stewardship. We wouldn't rush into development. The gas had been there for millions of years. It could wait a bit longer, but we would prepare thoughtfully, ensuring that when the time came, it would benefit not just me, but the entire region. It was on a crisp October morning, as I was harvesting the last of my summer tomatoes, that I heard a car coming up the drive. Not the familiar rumble of Sam's truck or James's sensible sedan, but something more hesitant, as if the driver wasn't sure of their welcome. I straightened, shading my eyes against the morning sun, and felt my heart skip when I recognized the vehicle. Not Christopher's sleek SUV, but the company car he'd driven when he first started working with Henry. An older model sedan, practical and understated, the kind of car Henry himself would have chosen. Christopher stepped out, looking thinner than when I'd last seen him. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by jeans and a simple button-down shirt. His eyes were shadowed with fatigue, but clearer somehow, more present. "Mom," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I hope it's okay that I came." I set down my basket of tomatoes and wiped my hands on my gardening apron. "It's more than okay, Christopher. I've been waiting for you." We stood there for a moment, the distance between us filled with everything unsaid. Then Christopher took a hesitant step forward and another, until he was close enough for me to see the faint stubble on his jaw, the redness around his eyes that spoke of recent tears. "I've made terrible mistakes," he said, his voice breaking. "I don't know if you can ever forgive me." I opened my arms, and my son, my only child, the boy I had rocked to sleep through countless nights, the young man I had watched graduate with such pride, collapsed into my embrace like he had when he was small and the world had wounded him. "Come inside," I said softly, when his tears had subsided. "Let's talk." In the kitchen, which now gleamed with fresh paint and the vintage appliances I'd lovingly restored, I made coffee while Christopher sat at the table, the same table under which Henry had hidden his message to me. "Madison's gone," he said abruptly, staring into the mug I placed before him. "She left me 3 weeks ago." I wasn't surprised, but I kept my expression neutral. "I'm sorry to hear that." Christopher laughed bitterly. "No, you're not. You saw through her from the beginning." "I'm sorry for your pain," I clarified. "Never. For that." He nodded, accepting this. "She left because the merger finalized. Her family got what they wanted, complete control of Brooks' investments. The prenuptial agreement her lawyers insisted on protects her completely. I get nothing in the divorce." He looked up, his eyes haunted. "Dad's company is gone, Mom. His life's work. I let them take it all." I reached across the table and took his hand. "Tell me everything." And he did. How Madison had systematically isolated him from old friends and colleagues. How she'd encouraged his worst tendencies. Spending beyond his means, drinking too much, neglecting responsibilities. How she'd used both seduction and humiliation to keep him off balance, always seeking her approval. And finally, how she'd manipulated him into signing the merger. Documents that effectively gave her family control of Brooks' investments. The day after the papers were filed, I came home to find her packing, Christopher said, his voice hollow. She didn't even bother to lie. She said her father had promised her a performance bonus for securing the merger, and now that she'd earned it, she was moving on to more interesting projects. He swallowed hard. Apparently, I wasn't an interesting enough project anymore. And the penthouse? I asked. Gone. The deed transferred to her father as part of the merger agreement. She made sure of that, said it was an essential asset for entertaining clients. Christopher ran a hand through his hair. I've been staying in a hotel, trying to figure out what to do next. I've lost everything, Mom. Everything. Dad built. Everything he trusted me with. I studied my son's face, the genuine remorse, the crushing guilt. I thought of Henry's box of evidence, the documentation of Madison's betrayals. I could show Christopher, confirm every awful suspicion, twist the knife of his regret. But what would that accomplish beyond more pain? Not everything, I said finally. You haven't lost everything. Christopher looked up, confusion in his eyes. What do you mean? You haven't lost yourself, Christopher. Yes, you made terrible mistakes. Yes, you were manipulated by someone who saw you as a means to an end. But you're here now. You've come back to yourself. How can you be so calm about this? He asked, incredulous. After what I allowed to happen to you? After what I did to Dad's legacy? I rose and went to the old oak cabinet in the corner, retrieving Henry's wooden box. Because your father saw this coming, Christopher. He prepared for it. Christopher stared at the wooden box I placed on the table between us. What is this? Your father's insurance policy, I said, sitting back down. He knew Madison was using you. He knew her family was targeting Brooks' investments. He gathered evidence, quite a lot of it, actually. I didn't open the box yet. Instead, I told Christopher about Henry's discovery of the natural gas deposits, about the trust he'd established, about his determination to protect what mattered most. He left me the cabin because he knew it was worth more than all the rest combined, I explained. Not just in monetary terms, though $50 million is certainly significant. He left it to me because he trusted me to use it wisely, to be a good steward of this land and its resources. Christopher's face registered shock, then disbelief, then a dawning understanding. $50 million? This property is worth $50 million? The mineral rights alone, yes. The land itself has additional value. I sipped my coffee. Your father was a shrewd businessman. To the end. And he didn't tell me, Christopher said softly. Because he didn't trust me. Because he wanted to protect you, I corrected. He knew Madison would use any information to her advantage. He kept this secret to give you a chance to see the truth on your own. Christopher's shoulders slumped. But I didn't. I was blind until it was too late. I pushed the wooden box toward him. This contains everything your father discovered about Madison, her family, and their plans for Brooks' investments. Photos, financial records, text messages. It's all there. You can look through it if you want, but I'm not sure what purpose it would serve now except to hurt you more. Christopher touched the box hesitantly, then withdrew his hand. I don't need to see it. I know what she was now. What I let myself become because of her. I nodded, respecting his decision. So what will you do now? I don't know, he admitted. I have some savings, enough to rent an apartment for a few months. Maybe find a job at another investment firm. Start over. He looked around the transformed cabin. You've created something beautiful here, Mom. You didn't need me or Brooks Investments or any of it. I needed my son, I said simply. I still do. Christopher's eyes filled with tears again. How can you even look at me after what I allowed to happen? The things Madison said to you, the way I stood by and did nothing. I reached across the table and took both his hands in mine. Christopher, do you know what I've learned these past months? Forgiveness isn't about erasing the past. It's about creating space for a different future. I don't deserve your forgiveness, he whispered. Probably not, I agreed, which startled a laugh out of him. But you have it anyway. That's how love works. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of everything said and unsaid hovering between us. Then I stood and went to the refrigerator. Are you hungry? I was about to make lunch when you arrived. Fresh tomato sandwiches from the garden. Christopher looked up, a ghost of his old smile flickering across his face. I'd like that. As I sliced the tomatoes, Christopher moved to the window, looking out at the garden and the hills beyond. It really is beautiful here. I can see why Dad loved it. Your father was wiser than either of us gave him credit for, I said. He knew what had real value. Over lunch, I shared my plans for the Eleanor Brooks Foundation and the careful approach we were taking to the natural gas development. Christopher listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions that reminded me of the bright, curious boy he'd once been. The foundation sounds amazing, he said. Helping women who've been displaced after long marriages? It's important work. It's healing work, I corrected. For them and for me. As we cleared the dishes, Christopher hesitated, then asked, "Do you think, could I help somehow? With the foundation or the conservation plans? I know I've burned a lot of bridges, but I want to do something meaningful again." I studied my son's face, the genuine hope there, the desire for redemption. As a matter of fact, we've been discussing establishing a financial literacy program for the women we serve. Many of them have never managed their own money. Your expertise could be valuable. I'd like that, he said, his voice stronger than it had been all day. I'd like to use what I know to help people, not just make more money. Then that's where we'll start, I said, one step at a time. That evening, Sam came over as he often did, bringing a fresh apple pie from his daughter's bakery in town. I introduced him to Christopher, watching as my neighbor sized up my son with shrewd eyes. "So you're Henry's boy," Sam said, shaking Christopher's hand. "Your daddy spoke highly of your business sense. Said you had good instincts when you listened to them." Christopher flushed. "I haven't been listening to my instincts much lately, but I'm trying to find my way back." Sam nodded, apparently satisfied with this honest admission. "Well, your mama could use some help replacing the roof before winter. Good place to start, working with your hands." And that was how Christopher came to stay at the cabin for the next month. Each day, he worked alongside Sam, learning how to hammer shingles, replace rotted beams, mix concrete for the new garden path. The physical labor seemed to ground him, washing away the corporate veneer that Madison had cultivated in him. In the evenings, we would sit on the porch, sometimes talking about Henry and the memories we shared, sometimes discussing the future of the foundation or the careful stewardship of the land. Occasionally, we simply sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge in the vast Texas sky. One night, as an owl called from the old oak tree at the edge of the property, Christopher said, "I've been thinking about Brooks Investments." I turned to him, curious. "What about it?" "Dad built it from nothing, created something that employed hundreds of people, supported their families." He looked out into the darkness. "Madison's family will strip it for parts, fire most of the staff, absorb what's valuable into MTC. All those people will lose their livelihoods. That's often how corporate takeovers work," I said gently. "But it doesn't have to be that way," Christopher insisted. "What if we started something new? Not to compete directly with MTC, that would be suicide, but a boutique investment firm focused on sustainable development. We could use some of the foundation's assets as seed money, build something that reflects Dad's values, not just his business acumen." I considered this. It would take time, building a reputation, establishing trust with clients. "I know," Christopher said, "but I have time, and I have a lot to make up for." I reached over and squeezed his hand. "I think your father would be proud of that vision." "Do you think it's possible?" he asked, vulnerability in his voice. "After everything I've done, do you think I could build something worthwhile?" "I know you can," I said with certainty, "because beneath all of Madison's influence, you're still Henry's son, and you're still my boy." 2 years passed. The Eleanor Brooks Foundation flourished, expanding to 3 locations across Texas, helping hundreds of women reclaim their independence after divorce or widowhood. The financial literacy program Christopher developed became our most requested service, with a waiting list that stretched months. Brooks Sustainability Partners, the investment firm Christopher founded with seed funding from my trust, specialized in environmentally responsible development projects across the Southwest. It remained small but earned a reputation for integrity and innovation, values Henry would have approved of wholeheartedly. The natural gas deposits beneath the cabin property were developed using the most advanced, least invasive methods available, with significant portions of the profits directed toward conservation easements that protected thousands of acres of hill country wilderness from future development. As for Madison and her family, their triumph was short-lived. The hollowed-out shell of Brooks Investments, laden with hidden debts Madison's family had failed to discover during their corporate raid, collapsed within 18 months of the merger. The scandal that followed, Accusations of fraud, securities violations, insider trading destroyed MTC Development's reputation. The last I heard, Madison had moved to Europe, fleeing the legal complications that continued to plague her father and his associates. The penthouse was sold at auction to satisfy creditors. Christopher attended out of curiosity but didn't bid. "It's just a box in the sky," he told me afterward. "Beautiful, but empty, like Madison." I still lived in the cabin, though cabin hardly described it anymore. The renovations had transformed it into a comfortable home that retained its rustic charm while incorporating modern conveniences. Christopher had built a small guest house on the property where he stayed when in town, though his work often took him to Austin or San Antonio. Sam Rodriguez remained my closest neighbor and friend. His arthritis worsened with age, but he still visited regularly, sitting on the porch swing he'd built, dispensing wisdom and wry observations about the changing landscape of the hill country. On the 5th anniversary of Henry's death, Christopher and I planted an oak tree near the garden. As we patted the soil around its slender trunk, Christopher said, "Do you ever wonder if Dad knew how things would turn out? If he planned all this?" I thought about Henry's letters, his careful preparation, his trust in me to weather the storm he saw coming. "I think he hoped," I said finally. "He hoped I would find my strength again. He hoped you would find your way back to what matters. And he gave us both the tools we needed to make those hopes reality." Christopher nodded, looking out over the land that had seemed like such a poor inheritance 5 years ago. "He was a good man." "Yes," I agreed. "And so are you." That evening, I sat alone on the porch after Christopher had gone to the guest house. The night was clear, stars scattered like diamonds across the velvet sky. Somewhere in the distance, coyotes called to one another, their voices rising and falling in ancient conversation. I thought about the woman I had been when Madison had laughed at me, when she had called me a wrinkled old witch and pushed me aside as worthless. That woman had been broken, her identity so wrapped up in being Henry's wife and Christopher's mother that she hardly knew who she was without those roles. The woman sitting on this porch knew exactly who she was. Eleanor Brooks, philanthropist, land steward, mentor, mother, friend. A woman who had discovered her own worth not in the reflections of others, but in the quiet certainty of her own heart. Henry had given me more than $50 million worth of natural gas. He had given me the opportunity to find myself again, to build a life that was truly mine. I closed my eyes, feeling the gentle Texas breeze against my face, and whispered to the night, "Sometimes the people who try to throw you away are the ones who unknowingly set you free, and the life they mocked you for becomes the life that saves you." The cabin, my home, stood solid behind me, no longer a symbol of rejection, but a monument to renewal. Inside were the photos of the women whose lives had been transformed by the foundation, letters from families benefiting from Christopher's ethical investment, strategies, plans for conservation projects that would preserve the beauty of this land for generations to come. Madison's cruel laughter had indeed turned to desperation, just as I had predicted that first night in the cabin. But my victory wasn't in her downfall. It was in the quiet joy I had found in this place, a joy that no one could take from me again.